Now, happiness, they say, has many roots, but none is more important than security. Nigerians are unhappy, unsafe, and insecure. From kidnapping to terrorism, many Nigerians can't live without looking behind their backs and can't sleep with their eyes closed. Terrorists are breathing down the neck of security agents, leaving locals homeless and hopeless, and the once peaceful towns are now a shadow of their old, tranquil selves. Ethnic tensions are abounded, religious violence is creeping back, and schools have become the devil's playground, and Nigeria's security situation has become a burning issue for far too long. But the danger lies more in not taking, a point or a stand, and also not talking about it. Today on VSA, the focus is on Nigeria's security situation. Welcome, I'm Sulai. For more than 10 years, there's been one security situation or the other for Nigeria. Nigeria probably has one of the most porous borders on the continent, with small arms proliferation a major issue bedeviling the country's security. Thousands have been displaced from their natural homes, and many families have lost their sons and daughters to death and terrorism. Now, hundreds of security agents have died in this battle. Young soldiers and some of the military's best minds have been killed. Billions of dollars have been paid as ransoms. State governments are growing tired, and their citizens barely live in peace. On Sunday, 3,000 repentant terrorists were accepted to be reintegrated into the society in Borno State, and many more are coming. Hundreds of deaths are going unreported, and just when you think the air is settled, you hear about fresh bloodshed. On the square today is Colonel Hassan Stan-Labo. He's a retired army officer and, of course, now a security consultant, and Kabir Adamu, who is also a security expert. They both join me. But first, good to see Kabir Adamu here with us. Kabir, thank you very much for being here again on VSA. You have time and again spoken, about what Nigeria needs to do in the fight against insurgency. And now that, it looks like the insurgents are also running out, of time, as we've seen that the Nigerian military have been able to make some big success, especially in the theater of wars around Nigeria's northeast specifically. First, give us an assessment of the security situation around there and what the Nigerian military is doing at the moment.
Thank you, Suleiman, and yes, it's a pleasure to be on Village Square again. Unfortunately, not so much a pleasure to be discussing the deteriorating security situation. There are some successes here and there, but then successes that are like double-edged swords, that if they are not handled very well, could unfortunately, turn out not to be real successes. I would like to start from May, precisely May 18th, when the now deceased leader of one of the factions, the Jamaat al-Sunnah lil-Dawat wal-Jihad, that's Bakr Shekau, killed himself after the other group, which is the Islamic State in West Africa province, had infiltrated his base, forcefully, and had, captured him, as it were, and had given him the option of either joining them or, as it were, they probably would have killed him or arrested him and detained him. Now, he chose the option of suicide and killed himself, and in the process killed the commander of the group that led the operation into his base. So from that time onwards, the group that was successful, which is the Islamic State, went on after the commanders of the other group, that is the Jamaat al-Sunnah lil-Dawat wal-Jihad. And whenever they meet those commanders, they would give them the option of either joining their ranks or, in their words, going back to the Nigerian military, and that they would follow that the Nigerian military will kill them. And so most of them, surprisingly, chose the option of going back to the Nigerian military. And between that May and early August, towards the middle of August, my database, my consultancy, recorded about 2,600 of such surrendering members of, especially the Jamaat al-Ahli al-Dawat wal-Jihad, or Boko Haram, and a few of the members of the Islamic State in West Africa province, and in particular from 3 local governments in Borno State, and that is Konduga, Goza, and Bama. And that is because of the proximity of these local governments to the strongholds of the Jamaat al-Ahli al-Dawat wal-Jihad. And of course, we saw videos from the Nigerian military where they had received these persons, and they showed them holding placards and indicating that they are surrendered Boko Haram. And then, of course, we saw the reaction from Nigerians condemning the whole development and saying that the Nigerian military was pampering these, former or surrendering members of the Jamaat al-Ahli al-Jihad. Also, around the same time, the media reported a certain publication by the United Nations suggesting that there is a secret program that is luring the commanders of this group, and that under that program, certain benefits were supposed to be given to these commanders of Boko Haram. So on the whole, this is sort of what is happening in terms of at the operational level. Now, at the strategic level, I would quickly like to mention that what we are dealing with is a counter-terrorism strategy. In Nigeria, that strategy is domiciled under the Office of the National Security Advisor.
Kabir, just a moment here. I want us to come back to talking about, the issue of the counterterrorism aspect of it, and also talk about the National Security Advisor, and also expand the findings of your group, of your office, because you've also shared some of them with VSA some other time, some of those concerns raised by your agency. But quickly, I want us to bring in Stan-Labo. Good to see you, Corner, and thanks for joining us. Listening to Kabir and some of the key things Nigeria is dealing with, one wonders how every time the Nigerian military, makes some form of success, the next thing it will seem as if the terrorists are out to erase the gains so far by the Nigerian military. Tell us, if you will, what you think is happening, especially around the theater of operation around Nigeria's northeast region, specifically around Borno State.
Thank you, Suleiman, and listeners, good evening. First and foremost, I must say, Suleiman, we need to really, really commend the job which Dr. Kabir's organization has been able to do. They have done quite an elaborate and intensive, do I say reportage or research work on the ongoing situation. And it is highly commendable because that report has really been able to fill up the gaps in a lot of places. I've not had the opportunity to actually commend him for that. Having said that, going by what you have just said, I think the situation is that it is very, very necessary that, look, our own forces, that's the Nigerian armed forces, we begin to take a good look again at our strategy and see how we can fine-tune them to, check some of the developments you have just talked about, a situation where haven't made some gains. These guys turn around to rubbish whatever we have done, or, seem to want to obliterate whatever the successes we have on ground. Okay, take for instance, there's been so much talk about this, what's it called now, the Supercam strategy within the operational space. The way it allows for huge ungoverned lands between communities and so on. It is important we begin to look seriously how that can be checked. A good number of us, well, let me speak for myself. I have more often than not always insisted that, look, it is important by now we get drones technology introduced into the battle space, to cover some of these gaps between communities and so on. And more so when we know that some of these drones, have some wonderful capabilities, surveillance capabilities, and even engagement capabilities, on these drones. And it could be controlled from quite a safe place by whoever is the drone commander or from an operational center. Okay, and these drones will do some wonderful work for you. There are lots of things we can introduce into the battle space by now. I'm being made to understand, because it's quite a bit longer, I've visited the Northeast. I'm being made to understand that Boko Haram have even commenced introducing some of this technology. So we as an army, I wonder what is still keeping us back. Is it part of the huge deficits that are still responsible? And when I say huge deficits, I'm looking at all the big fights, the issue of funding, manpower, and so on and so forth. We need to really address all this. If these deficits are still there, then it still be holding us back. I know we cannot clear them all in a day, but as much as possible, reasonable efforts should be made by leadership, especially at the political level, to ensure that these deficits are highly curbed by ensuring that it gets across to the military high command all or some of their requirements to be able to address some of these problems on the ground. We could go on, reciting over the problems over and over and over again, and we're beginning to sound like broken records. But the point is that we need to take a look again at our strategy and, do some fine-tuning. Yes, please.
I'm excited about this. You've actually set the conversation, on the area of strategy, which Kabir was almost delving into. Kabir, you've had Colonel Stan-Labo, and he's also said, that strategy, Nigeria must revisit the strategy and see why the terrorists, come all out every time they record some success. Well, everything is eroded. So now you were going to tell us about the office of the NSA and some of the key things that they just may be, doing. Tell us, if you will, if this also involves the rehabilitation, reintegration of those that were arrested, because some Nigerians are asking the question, doesn't this also, make nonsense or rubbish the morale of Nigerian military? If the army says that if we've been able to apprehend some of these people who have maimed their colleagues, brought about, hardship, untold hardship to the nation, why is the country so quick, to letting them go back into the society?
Yes, so Suleiman, the counterinsurgency strategy in Nigeria is domiciled under the Office of the National Security Advisor. And there's a document called the National Counterterrorism Strategy. And then there is a commander, counterterrorism, currently, who is also in that office. And the idea is that he's supposed to coordinate between the various components of counterterrorism that are happening within the country. What both myself and Colonel Stan-Labo are saying is that it's high time probably that we revisit that strategy and do an evaluation and find out those things that we've done correctly in terms of the implementation of that strategy and those things that perhaps we've not done very well. If you look at the various global publications on counterterrorism, I mean, the most popular one would be the Global Terrorism Index. It has identified one factor as being responsible for the resilience of terrorist groups, and that is their ability to influence the societies where they operate. So that means if you want to bring an end any insurgency, then take away that ability they have to influence. And how do you take out that ability? Two very important things. Number one, block their funding. Number two, counter their messaging methods through either psychological ops or a strategic communication platform that will be more effective than theirs. And if I'm going to stop in discussing just these two components, that's blocking their funding, as well as a counter narrative through either strategic communication or psychops, I will tell you that there is a lot that needs to be done in terms of the implementation of our counter-terrorism strategy. We cannot end this war if we do not improve on these two areas. Of course, we can talk about their weapons sources, how they are able to get their weapons. We can talk about their ability to recruit. Again, all of these are components of the national counterterrorism strategy, and we need to do more to improve on our, especially if we have key performance indicators that will tell us whether we're doing this rightly or we're not doing it wrongly. I can also tell you that the counterterrorism strategy is meant to bring the whole of government together, and more importantly, to ensure the support of people, that's you and I, Nigerians, in the implementation of that strategy. But frankly, the reality is how many people actually even know that that document exists. Even governors, I can tell you in all confidence that even governors, even in the Northeast, are not even aware that that document exists. So again, more needs to be done in terms of carrying that strategy down to the people so that they understand its content and support its content more importantly.
Let me bring in Colonel Stan-Labo and listen to Kabir, some of the key things he's raised here, talking about strategy and of course also working against the incentives that ultimately will make them have more, support, especially from amongst the locals, is very important here. But keep in mind, again, some of those concerns about sponsorship, blocking the funding. We recall it was just some month ago in faraway United Arab Emirates, some Nigerians were, apprehended, and they went through the judicial system in that country, and they're already doing time. They were called sponsors of Boko Haram. And one wonders if Nigeria has actually keyed into the information from the UAE to also do some of the things Kabir has also raised here, and that is blocking funding of these terrorists.
Yeah, thank you, Suleiman. You see, this is why, to a greater extent, you find some commentators like myself or analysts like myself begin to wonder how much of complicitness can we talk about as far as government in this country is concerned over the situation ongoing on ground. I mean, our security situation on ground. If we are looking at how we can, penetrate the center of gravity of what is all ongoing, one good component of the center of gravity has to do with sponsors. Because if we are able to puncture that component, I think to a greater extent, we weaken the opposition group, we weaken the belligerents, or weaken the terrorists. Okay? But so far, even when direct hands have been pointed to some of these sponsors, we still begin to see that government is hesitant at reaching out to them, bringing them to book, and so on. We're really serious about fighting terrorism. Why is it that it has even gotten to a point whereby when you begin to say, look, what are these sponsors? Why do you not do something about them before you know what it's as if the government is feeling very uncomfortable? You just talked about what happened outside this country and how, of course, the pointer is supposed to be for us to do a follow-up. How about those who have discovered problem? What of those who have even apologized in leadership in this country? What steps are we taking to make sure we get out some of these guys? Ask them a few questions, relieve them of their appointment. You must make the average Nigerian feel satisfied that actually you are out there doing the job in the national interest and in seeing that the lives of Nigerians or the Nigerian citizens is protected. Some of us ain't seen enough of that coming out of government. All we see is short rhetorics. I must tell you, Suleiman, rhetorics. I'm not seeing enough of action. I've not seen enough of, lines of actions that make me say, yes, I think we are serious now. And that is why a lot of people keep talking about body language, body language, body language. These are all the things I'm referring to. Just before you talk about sponsors, I was just about here, jotting down a few things, trying to see how I can tilt this discussion in that direction. I never knew you also listening along the same line with me when you introduced the issue of sponsors. And that's why I was just shaking my head when you brought it in. Oh, right? I think this guy is also on the same page with me. Suleiman, we need to see more of actions from government that will convince us. There is so much talk today in the air about government knowing what is happening. And I'm becoming more and more convinced. This is a government who couldn't monitor, or who cannot see today, monitor our airspace. Aircrafts are passing and dropping logistics in the forest for terrorists. We cannot monitor our airspace. This is the same government that cannot monitor our land borders that have become so porous. We closed borders for about 2-3 years, Suleiman, and it is within that same period that we had the highest influx of foreign Fulanis into this country. Within that period, carrying their AK-47 on their neck. They were not hiding it. They moved in with impunity. And we couldn't check our land borders. Our maritime environment is completely taken over and dominated by pirates. We cannot monitor our high seas. Where is our sovereignty? Can we just be serious as a government and fight terrorism? All these begin to give the impression to the average Nigerian, the ordinary Nigerian on the street, that, oh no, I think my government knows what's happening. These guys are just deceiving us.
Let me bring this in here quickly. I apologize for butting, there. The thing here, for instance, as a former military officer, and I'm quite sure, because I should have asked how you felt about that invasion, that attack on the Nigerian Defence Academy. It is one key issue we must also talk about here. The soldiers were killed and they got in. And the conversation amongst Nigerians is that, well, it looks like it has become very easy to break down our walls and have, these bad guys come in. Ordinarily, I'm excited for once that we have a military chief who said he smells, some sabotage somewhere, and he's also carrying out investigation. But on the surface, how did that news come to you?
Very disappointed. As a Nigerian, as a patriot, I felt highly disappointed because I feel so bad whenever military installations are touched by these guys. Because maybe in my own imagination, I want to believe we should be immune to an extent. There are places that should not be able to reach. But to come in right into Kaduna, a military base, Kaduna is one of the highest military garrisoned.
Well, it looks like
towns in this country or states in this, something is wrong. And even without the chief saying that he smells some sabotage, I mean, already in our minds, a good number of us had already said that look, there must be some insider collaboration here. Something is wrong somewhere. This has got to be looked into. This has got to be investigated. Heads have got to roll here, okay? Because it's embarrassing. More so when the Defense Academy is constituted with the Forestation School, or is it a forestry? I can't remember the actual name now. The Forestry School, where we had a similar incident not too long, where some students were abducted and so on. I expected that would have immediately informed the authorities there to immediately tighten up the belt completely within that general area, okay? And seeing that even during weekends, when normally we throw the gates open for people to come in and worship, which is true, frankly speaking, it's true for all of us that have, lived in barracks or trained in military institutions, we know that is true. In most cases on Fridays, we allow people to come in and worship. Nigerians were all too religious. So I think we're all guilty of that. It wasn't as if it was being deliberate. But then, given the present situation, these guys exploited that, used it to study the ground also, and really plan all what they wanted to execute very well. But I expected that as a commander on ground, or if I were to be in charge of that place, given the present situation and with what happened at that forestation, I would have immediately tightened up everything and ensure that gates are not thrown open on Fridays or thrown open on Sundays for people to come in and worship and so on. Additional measures would have been put in place, just to further see how we can, reinforce the hardness of the target.
Let me bring in Kabir here. Kabir, I take you back to the issue of communication and also how to, break into the incentives that, would seem as if is what the terrorists are latching on to getting members. We've seen some people say some of those that were arrested were promised, women, some were promised drugs, and these are some of the incentives. And again, communication is also key, knowing full well that the main language of these people is to use religion. And how can those others who, in this case, Islam, the religious leaders, especially the Muslim religious leaders, how can they also help the military, especially in speaking the language of true Islam to the people, so that those who already see these people as role models don't go, voluntarily, or otherwise join their fold?
Thank you, Suleiman. So under the National Counterterrorism Strategy, there is an aspect called countering violent extremism. And under that, there are two major, or rather three actually, that answers your question directly. So that's the one, strategic communication, two, de-radicalization, and then three, counter-radicalization. All of these are well-founded counter-terrorism strategies that have been successful, around the world. And so even though we have incorporated them, we're not yet implementing them fully. In other words, the policy formulation recognizes the role of scholars that are meant to support the government strategy. In other words, these scholars are meant to be preaching to people, to explain to them. The jihadists, these particular ones in the Northeast, especially the ISWAP and Jamaat al-Ahl Sunnah lil-Dawat wal-Jihad, there are four principles that they use in manipulating and kind of conscripting people psychologically to support their ideology. And once, if you have a good scholar who understands these four principles, all he needs to do is continue preaching and using scriptures to show that it's the misinterpretation of the scriptures that led to those four principles. And once you do that, then you take away their ability to recruit. And by so doing, you are bringing the group to an end. Unfortunately, we haven't been doing enough of that. I am not even aware that we're funding that particular component of the counter-terrorism strategy. In fact, the few scholars that have attempted to speak out against the group have been killed. Incidentally, not just in the Northeast. The case of Albani in Zaria is quite, a popular development, where he was traced to Zaria and killed by members of this group. Then the case of Malan Jafar in Kano is another example, where they followed him to his mosque in Kano and killed him. And there are several of such clerics and scholars in Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe that have been killed by this group. So despite the fact that there was no government effort to incorporate them into this de-radicalization and counter-radicalization mechanism, the few that decided to do it on their own, of course, met their Waterloo through the actions of this. Now, the other component is through advocacy and sensitization campaigns on radio and other mass media platforms. And in particular, there are, I don't want to mention their names because it's...
go ahead, no problem, I understand.
Yeah, so there are several media outlets that exist in the Northeast who are doing this. And incidentally, they're not being funded by government. There are private concerns, some of them development partners that have invested in this particular component of the national counterterrorism strategy. Now, whether they're doing it consciously as part of the national counterterrorism strategy, or they're doing it just to support Nigeria in terms of
more like CSR.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, maybe some of these, organizations are doing it like, their own responsibilities to the community.
Exactly. So in the case of the development partners, that is it. I'll tell you in particular, one of the development partners is funding a whole radio station from setting up the radio station to its programming component, specifically to achieve this purpose of counter radicalization and de-radicalization. And that particular radio station has been singled out for attack by these groups. So clearly, they understand the efficacy of this counter-radicalization and de-radicalization campaigns. And of course, if they're feeling the effect, then it means it's hitting them. And that's perhaps what government should have also understood and invested in. In terms of strategic communication, there was a time when under the former administration, you recall, they had a unit, and every day or weekly, they would come out with releases where all the government officials would speak one language and they would be aiming to achieve one purpose. Unfortunately, we haven't seen enough of that recently. So again, your question is relevant, and just like we mentioned earlier on, there is a need to evaluate the national counter-terrorism strategy and see what aspects we have left and what aspects we're doing correctly so that we can realign ourselves and ensure that we're meeting the objectives of that strategy.
Well, we'll take a moment. When we'll come back, we'll be speaking with Colonel Stan-Labo and Kabir Adamu. That will be when we return to talk more about what the people should also be doing. We've exhausted, or we've not exhausted everything about what the government of Nigeria and the military should be doing. But the people, it was saying from the conversation we're having with our guests today, the people also should have some input, religious, community, and of course, those who can actually go on the ground and help in information gathering to solving this problem in Nigeria. That's when we return.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented, hip life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every raise, we find our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories that define our continent live.
Welcome back. Apologies for that mix on that slide about the PIA. Actually, we're talking about the security situation in Nigeria. And of course, I recall that the Sultan of Sokoto, Alhaj Saad Abu Bakr, said at the Interreligious Council that killings in Nigeria are underreported. Nigerians are dying and many clashes are leading to bloodshed. Clashes in Jos North have led to hundreds of deaths. Thousands have been kidnapped and released, and some of them unlucky to be killed. Now, security agents, military officers have also been killed. Soldiers die on the war front, and the problems seem to persist. The situation is dire and needs immediate and lasting solutions. I still have with me retired Colonel Hassan, Stan-Labo, and Kabir Adamu, both security experts. Quickly, let me start with you, Colonel Stan-Labo. You know, what can state governments do, you know, to improve their security outside the presence of the military? And, you know, how important is the understanding of the cultural perspectives that are behind some of these security tensions, especially in Plateau and Benue states?
Thanks so much. I can only call for greater synergy among the states. Greater synergy in that they should be able to coordinate their various strategies to ensure that there isn't much disjointness in their strategy layouts in such a way that the bandits begin to exploit existing windows, especially the states that are contiguous to each other, okay? So that you don't come up with policies or strategies that would see bandits begin to migrate from your state into another state that has got softer landing for them. So coordination or synergy in that direction will help a great deal. We are all aware of recent initiatives by some of these governors, you know, in trying to ensure that you know, there are closure of some of these cattle markets in some of the states. Also, some of them are also coming up with restriction in the movement of cattle to certain states and so on and so forth. If this is well coordinated, these are all lines of actions that are not kinetic in nature, but of course will go a long way in checking the activities of these bandits on ground. It calls for a lot of cooperation amongst the state governors. They should not act in isolation of each other. They should always act, you know, in consultation with the other, so that they'll be able to tighten up all belts. The time has come for joint action now at all levels. Joint actions at all levels. Then, of course, too, as much as possible, intelligence must be shared, be it amongst the security agencies within these states, and be it among the locals, especially some of these local platforms like the Hunters Association and so on. I expect the state governors to take all these associations very serious. Maybe they are not aware. I should let them know that these bandits are beginning to be very scared of these hunters, because the Hunters Association are very, very brutal. Okay? They really, really go out there and exhibit everything you think they have in them to make sure they curb this. I expect the governors to fall back on such platforms and make good use of them, encourage them, and so on. It calls for a lot of cooperation, like I said.
Quickly here, let me bring in Kabir to weigh in on some of the things I just asked, some of the questions I just asked Colonel. And it has to do also with the cultural perspectives, you know, or differences that Nigerians have seen causing security tension amongst the two states of Plateau and Benue states. And also see if you can actually link this with the clashes, the recent clashes, Kabir, between fishermen and herders, you know, in Cameroon that led to the death of many people, considering how close that country is to Nigeria. So shouldn't the country, Nigeria, be worried about a possible spread of these clashes into Nigeria?
So, Suleiman, ethnic identities and the inability of African societies to manage these ethnic identities, unfortunately, is not a new thing. It's something that has, I think, always existed as part of our political sort of configuration in Africa. But more recently, and this is what worries me, how we have weaponized these differences in ethnic identity. And of course, how the introduction of religion, especially the two major religions, Islam and Christianity, have also added to this weaponization of both, on the one hand, ethnic identities, and then the weaponization of religion to achieve certain purposes. And in this instance, in the case of both Plateau and to an extent Kaduna, we're seeing increasingly how this is adding to the drivers of conflict and the conflict dynamics in these two locations. Every time you are about to approach an election cycle, you see a deliberate attempt to trigger this conflict lines, identity and religion. And you see the purveyors of this conflict trying to cash in on the situation in order to achieve their political objectives. Now, I started by saying that our inability to manage this is what worries me. If as an intelligence analyst, I realize this, what I would ask immediately, because we've got this three-line cycle of progression of actions in intelligence. First one is awareness, and then second one is anticipation, and then the third one is mitigation. So if as an intelligence analyst, based on my data sets, I'm able to see that trend where over a period of a decade or even longer, we're seeing this cycle just before the election season, you are seeing a trigger of this cycle of violence. So what has the government done in terms of introducing measures to prevent this cycle? The immediate answer you hear from government is the introduction of early warning signals, where these early warning signals are supposed to trigger a kind of response. And then the second component is peace-building effort. But there is a missing element there, which is to take away the actors, remove them from the scene so that it becomes a bit more difficult for whoever is the purveyor of this conflict to use those actors. And who are these actors? They are gunmen. I know the phrase unknown gunmen has become very popular in Nigeria. You heard the Sultan asking that question. How can we be funding our intelligence agencies and yet we still have unknown gunmen? I can tell you from where I stand as someone who has a private collection capability that is in no way near the expertise and the capability of what the government has. I can see that trend. And that trend tells me clearly where these unknown gunmen are coming from. And unlike what I hear some people suggest, indicating, for instance, that those unknown gunmen have an ethnic identity. Now, whether they have an ethnic identity or not, the motive is not ethnic. So even if, for instance, they are Fulanis, they are not doing it because they are Fulanis. They are not doing it because they are Irigues. They are not doing it because they are Biroms. They are doing it to achieve a political objective and sometimes a commercial objective. So if we're going to address it, we must approach it from that point of view, understand the political objective, diffuse that political objective, and the second element, take away their havens, the ungoverned spaces where they hide, take it out, dominate those ungoverned spaces, and deny them the ability to hibernate in those ungoverned spaces and then come out to attack our people. The second point is their weapon disposition. Where did they get these weapons from? How can we prevent them from having access to those weapons? Of course, if you do that, it means you are reducing their capabilities. I'm not seeing enough of that. And then thirdly is to reduce the community complicity and all of that. I went to a community in the southern part of the country, and I came out shivering because we're seeing an institutionalization of the conflict where community members are contributing money to buy weapons and to buy armory. And so you are having a situation where every community is trying to outdo the other community in terms of the possession of weapons, because they believe that it is the other community that is attacking them and government is not protecting them. So all of these things that I've mentioned have become the conflict dynamic, especially in the north central of the country. And unfortunately, it's a trend that cuts across a lot of African countries. Ethnic identity has become a weaponized tool for political actualization.
Let me stretch it by bringing Colonel Stan-Labo. Colonel, thanks again for your time. And listening to Kabir, we're trying to go deep into communities. And this time we're looking at the roles of the traditional communal society. How can they help, in this fight against, terrorism, insurgency, and of course insecurity, by contributing somehow to the effort of government?
They can be of great use, I can assure you, Suleiman. And talking out of experience, I have had the privilege of overseeing an operation in which, frankly speaking, the traditional institution and even the community members, especially the elders, the very elderly, who are very, very immobile, so to speak, we are able to really, really assist with information, which we got crystallized into intelligence eventually. It depends on how serious we are at trying to engage them. We must give them that sense of importance, make them have that sense of relevance to the entire system, and be able to talk them into understanding that the role we want them to play will go a long way in stabilizing the community, which, given their age, they will be leaving behind, and that this country will forever remain grateful. I had the privilege of assembling very elderly people, entertained them and spoke to them. I moved from churches to church, talking to people. Okay, it was in a part of the country where we don't have mosque. I'm talking of Akwa Ibom now, where I saw some skirmish going on in the community. Coming out of that, taking that experience, we engaged it in the vacancy, where I did serve briefly as an intelligence officer, and it worked a great deal. We could replicate this in several communities today, especially in the Northeast, and of course where we have all these banditry threats up and down. We must get the people involved. We must get the traditional institutions involved. We must give them the sense of belonging they deserve and bring them into the entire scheme of things and make them really feel wanted and important enough. You don't continue to just push them aside. I want to just use them when you think you need them. Like a lot of people have said, can we even take it a step further? Create a place for them, in the constitution, come out with a role for the traditional rulers, and so on. We must give them a deserving place within our communities and make sure they really have this sense of relevance. We could go a great extent in seeing that we benefit a great deal from them. It is important, Suleiman, that we look into that. It is important. They can really be of assistance.
Let me quickly bring in Kabir so that we can wrap up this conversation. And Kabir, listening to Colonel Stan, the community, the traditional rulers, the religious leaders, listen to both of you. They all have a part to play here. The people. But again, the sour point was when you also mentioned that some of those who started, helping to dissuade the people from listening to these terrorists have also paid the supreme price. Shouldn't the country, Nigeria now, be giving some kind of protection to these people who are working to ensuring that they change the mindset of the people? And also, do you also think that a bit of politics is in this whole, imbroglio? How can the politicians also help, the military and in solving this challenge that the country is enmeshed in? Kabir.
Thank you, Suleiman. I mean, the primary responsibility of any government is the provision of security. That's clearly spelled out in our constitution. And so protection, in the context that you used it, is the responsibility on the government to protect us from any harm, whether seen or unseen. And that means the government should provide the right environment for every Nigerian to protect himself, even if they are not able to, for instance, do that protection themselves. And unfortunately, the fact that in this year alone, in the first quarter of this year, from 1st January to the 31st of March, my consultancy recorded 3,000 plus deaths in the country. It means, unfortunately, there is more that needs to be done in terms of this protection component. I have had discussion, and I'm behind it 100%, that we need to make that justiciable. In other words, let's insert certain clauses in the Constitution where if the government fails to protect us, we can actually go to court for whatever level of government or arm of government that is failing to protect us, and sue that arm of government. Perhaps then the whole of government will wake up, and even we as Nigerians will now start asking critical questions around this inability of government to protect us. Now, to the second part of your question, which is the role of politicians and the relationship actually between politicians and our security leads. Time will not allow me to go into the full details of explaining how this all happened, but let me start by saying that we are a function of our historical past, colonialism as well as the military past that has affected our polity and has resulted to where we are. And I'll explain this quickly. Most of the persons that we have either in the helm of affairs at the moment are either former military or have had one role or the other to play in the military. Most of the organizations within the security subsector were actually created under a military era. And so unfortunately, some of their functions are geared towards the protection of a military rule, as it were, not necessarily a civilian administration. And if you look closely at the mandates of the organization, you find out that they are not properly situated inside a democratic system. In other words, the National Assembly is supposed to be the check on the activities of these organizations, and there are 27 of them in government at the moment that have security responsibilities, and the National Assembly is supposed to check their activities. But because of our military past, the National Assembly is unable to do that. And so what has happened is that these organizations don't feel responsible to you and I. They see themselves as an authority that can actually work against us. So that's why EndSARS happened, because the police, frankly, they don't see themselves as answerable and accountable to you and I. But the good news is that the Buhari administration attempted to change that by introducing the revised National Security Strategy 2019, where we were promised that it's going to be a paradigm shift to democratize security in the country. Unfortunately, we haven't seen the implementation of that document. So the way to go is to implement that document, change the current ethos of these 27 ministries, departments, and agencies that have roles in security, so that they become answerable to us. And who has that responsibility to implement that? It is the politicians.
Well, it's a fine place for us to leave it. I must say thank you to you both, Kabir Adamu and Colonel Hassan Stan-Labo. We do hope that, well, in the days ahead, we should be able to, get you back in the studios and talk about this. This is an all-important issue for Nigeria and Africans. Security remains the bedrock of every thriving society, and one like Nigeria's needs a solid security architecture, as both of you have said, to fulfill its immense potential. Once again, thank you, gentlemen. And of course, to our viewer, many thanks for watching. I'm Sulaiman. See you again.